Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. It's time once again for my NTRL Racing League to get this season underway. Today is going to be footage from round 1 of my Saturday league, which is over at Le Mans and features only Group 3 vehicles. There's a few changes for this season, including how the cars and manufacturers as well as teams and drivers work. So without further ado, let's head in and have a look at some of the key changes for this season. So this is how the Saturday League will work for this season and ongoing into the future. It will be Group 3 only. This will be made up of 4 manufacturers per season, meaning that each season we will then rotate the manufacturers depending on what ran in the previous overall season. In terms of the teams, it is 4 teams of 4 drivers, which has a driver tier system in place. So the best performing league racer from the previous season, or in terms of their driver rating, cannot be put together. So each of the main 4 will then be split up, and then they will be able to pick from the next 3 tiers based in terms of overall rating of the previous system and overall driver rating. There will then be a 15-minute qualifying session per round, followed by a 15-minute sprint on the racing softs with no fuel and no tyre wear. We will then go into the main feature race, which will be set depending on the results of the sprint race, which will be 60 to 90 minutes in length. So let's meet the team cars for this season. Up first we have the Porsche 911 RSR based on the 991 generation. This is an absolute classic for league racing and perhaps one of the most popular. In terms of the overall driving style, this is a very stable car that is very useful at almost every track. It doesn't really have a weak point apart from the grid start, where it does tend to drop back. However, on a rolling start it certainly loses that poor point and really should be competing in almost every single race. Next up we have AMG with the 2020 GT3. This may be the overall favourite for this season. It's an absolute rocket ship in comparison to when it started first in the game. It's always had brilliant straight line speed, but now all of a sudden it has incredible acceleration out of the corners and overall is a very good choice. This for me is definitely the car of the season and it is definitely the one to watch going for the overall driver's title as well as the teams. Over in terms of the third car, this is going to be the Ferrari 458 Italia GT3. Again, an absolute classic of league racing. A very weird car, meaning that in terms of its overall handling style, it is definitely one the drivers are going to have to adjust to. But once you do adjust yourself to this car, there is a chance of a very good points haul and even taking out some overall wins as well as overall teams wins. Again, a very strong car, maybe just outclassed by the Porsche 911. And then finally, for manufacturer number 4 for this season, we have Subaru with the BRZ GT300, which yours truly will be driving this season with his team. Again, once a very overpowered car, now took a good few nerfings and will probably be the weakest of the 4. However, through the mid-speed corners, the grip on this thing is absolutely unreal and should be able to begin to rival the other machines on the grid on the tighter courses of the season. So there you go, that's your 4 manufacturers for this season. So let's send the safety car round for an overview and lap of the Le Mans Circuit de la Sarthe layout. Now to begin with, you're going to come off the straight into a sweeping right-hander. You'll then get yourself into a very tight left-right situation. It's very easy to get it wrong here and it's very easy to pick up a penalty. You'll then run under the Dunlop bridge and then start heading down into the S's. Now this part of the track is very crucial. Whilst the first right-hander isn't too bad, this left-hander down here has a slight banking which can really upset some of the cars. You'll then run into Tetra Rouge, which is the right-hander just before you get onto the Morson straight. At this point it's absolute rocket ship style as you want your top speed to absolutely max out. A good run down there, you'll get into these points where you have the chicanes added in. Obviously we're going to run the chicane layout and not the big long straight, which will take us right the way to the end. So you've got two of these sections. Again, it's very crucial to get these right. You get them wrong and you can have a big bad long run down to the next chicane. You'll then come down to the bottom of the track here. This right-hander can be very tricky. If you get it wrong, again, it's all about losing that time onto the big long straights. You'll then come into Indianapolis, which is going to be the right-hander. You'll then have this left-hand section, which again you can enter at some terrific speed in the Group 3 machines before straightening out and heading down into a very hard braking zone for this right-hander here. Again, a good exit up into the Porsche curves is going to be absolutely crucial to keep your time ticking. Then into the Porsche curves, this is where the Subaru really comes into its own over any of the others, able to chop out around about 1.5 to 2 seconds just in this sector alone. Again, some of the more bulkier and faster cars struggling through there, whereas the little Subaru is absolutely rapid. This will then be the finishing point of the lap. So again, very tight, very twisty. Even the GTR safety car there is struggling. Then you've got your left right section before you go up and cross the line. Overall, a very technical track and an absolute icon of the racing world. So let's get into it for the brand new season. So it's time to get round one underway of our Group 3 Saturday League, and as you can see, Mira put in a great lap to put the Ferrari on pole in the dying seconds of qualifying. He is going to get an absolute rocket start on our false grid start type of grid. We'll have a rolling start for the endurance race. So sprint race time, all cars will be on racing softs. There will be no fuel use and there will be a slight bit of tyre wear, but not enough to take effect over a 15-minute period. This allows the cars to be absolutely flat out before going for a completely different change during the endurance race, where both tyre management and fuel usage will be absolutely the key to taking wins. As you can see, we've got a nice mix of cars on the grid. It seems that Ferrari are performing very well, as we can see one of them picking up a 5-second penalty there. Pedro also running great in P9 as he just drops just back behind Jace there, who did struggle in qualifying. So definitely a mixed bag in terms of the expected results. There is a ton of different mixed grids going on here. There's some battles going off at the front, some battles going off in the mid pack, and some battles going off towards the back, as we see Braggy beginning to make up some positions that he seems to have lost early on. Tommy Hawk, he's continuing to push on. He didn't make qualifying, meaning that he had to start from the back of the grid, and as we can see, Steve sits in last. So let's find out what actually happened. It seems like both the two teammates for Ferrari ended up colliding, as well as one of the Porsches running out wide, and the Subaru of Jace also getting knocked about in the early stages. Not good for him, considering he was very disappointed with his qualifying result. Up front to end off lap 1, it will be Lemony Squeeze, who leads the way for Porsche and himself, standing in for Timo, who couldn't make the race with network connection issues, unfortunately. However, a great standing result for Porsche nonetheless. P2 is Mira, who has just dropped a position back, with the Mercedes of CEO sitting in P3. Now, in terms of 4th and 5th, it's going to be myself and Sean who are battling away for that P4 spot. Again, the leading Subaru, myself there, struggling really with the pace and acceleration out of corners, where the car is at a complete loss of really any decent pace. Jodie is then going to get pushed off by Stee, dropping her all the way to the back of the grid in the sprint race. She's probably going to be really fuming with that one, considering she did have a very good qualifying and very good early pace. Up front, as you can see, Sean is then going to have a bit of an off, and that's going to collect the Subaru, who then takes some damage from the rear end of that Ferrari, and that is going to allow Vipersonics to get that second Porsche upwards of P5 and start to try and make a run on the 458 just in front of him. Again, back up front, it was Mira's turn to take the lead once again. After starting from pole, he did drop back, but these three up front of CEO, Lemony and Mira were battling away the entire time, and Mira's going to put it around the outside of the Porsche, get it on the inside and get this one covered off to move himself back into P1 and put Ferrari back in the lead, really, of the entire team race. He would then continue leading on a decent amount of the race as we get towards the midpoint. As you can see, he's pulling off a fair gap here to CO in P2, who has also been battling away with the Porsche. So Lemony now down in P3, but I'm sure he'll be using Slipstream to his advantage, as CO will also be trying to do the same to close up Mira, as that AMG has a very good strong pace around here at Le Mans. Whilst there were still battles at this point in the race, it was definitely settling down compared to the very clustered start. As you can see, myself in the leading Subaru managed to get myself back up to P4, with Vipersonics and Sean still battling away for P5, so Porsche in a really healthy spot. Again, the same with Ferrari, who are also looking very strong here. Jay sits in the second Subaru in P7 with a half-a-second penalty, again improving on his very poor qualifying but seemingly starting to adjust to the BRZ. Darrell sits in a very respectable P8, as well as the second Mercedes of Braggy sitting in P9 overall. A great battle throughout the sprint race between those pair. Nizam, he is on a bit of a recovery drive after his 5-second penalty early on for that contact with his teammate, as well as Dave having a very decent race in P11. P12 is Tommy Hawk, who continues his push forward up the grid. Again, after not qualifying, starting from the back, he's having a great race in the BRZ and really starting to adjust to the new car. Steve sits in P13 with Pedro in P14 and Sal in P15. Jody still sits in last place after that spin from Steve early on, who didn't seem to pick up a penalty either. As we can see, DWG, he's going to have a bit of an off, clipping the curb and getting a bit too much of it there, then spinning himself out into the route of Pedro, who then also gets collected. Sal then moves up 2 positions there, so great for him, and Jody is also going to grab an extra position on her recovery, as we see DWG sat in the gravel trap there, so upwards to P15 for the recovering Porsche. It's the closing stages of the race, and Lemony, Squeeze and Mira are continuing to battle away, with the Mercedes of CO just dropping back a little bit in these later stages of the sprint race. I believe through some penalties, should I say, that have kind of, put him back as the race has gone on. So Lemony is going to take the lead there, and he is going to manage to hold on as we complete 4 laps in the 15-minute allotted time for the sprint race, and it's going to be Porsche to take the first race win of the season, and the first reserve driver, I believe, to take an outright win. A great win on debut for Lemony Squeeze as he stands in for Timo. P2 will go to Mira, who started on pole, and we'll get the extra point for that. CO takes P3, and the last BRZ, or sorry, the first BRZ will take P4 of myself. P5 goes to another Porsche. Ferrari take P6 as well, with Sean, a great result for him and really showing potential in these sprint race circumstances. The battle's still going on all the way to the end here, as we see Animal Darrell battling away with Jace, who again is on that recovery drive after an early spin as well. Darrell is just going to take it in P7, with Jace taking a P8 in the second Subaru BRZ. Braggy, he sits P9, dropping back a little bit from the Porsche in the end. Steve takes P10 after that contact with Jody in the early stages of this race. Nizam, he takes P12 overall, and Pedro is going to take P13 as he rumbles the curb there just ahead of his teammate Sal. Again, another stand-in and a great result for him on debut in P14. Jody recovers to P15, and last but not least will be the final Subaru of DWG in P16 overall. Fastest lap goes to Lemony Squeeze. Time for the endurance race now, and we have a rolling start as Lemony Squeeze will get us away. This will all be in the grid order that the sprint race finish in. So Lemony, and then it's going to be Mira, CO, and then myself. So all 4 manufacturers represented in the top 4, which is exactly what we wanted to see. Lemony gets us away nice and strong, with Mira keeping pace into the first few corners, also CO as well, as the Porsche begins to make a move on the BRZ in P4, and will get that one done. That is the Rothman branded Porsche of Vipersonics, who gets himself up into P4, and then as you can see, the Subaru already at risk of beginning to drop back already, as we saw Sean there starting to apply the pressure to the leading BRZ as well. Just a little bit more back, as we can can see the likes of Stee, Tommy Hawk, as well as Tommy goes and makes it move on the inside, and that moves him up once again. A fantastic recovery drive from him. Jace not getting away too quick as he drops back from the AMG in front of him. So again, a lot of action coming on the early stages, and this time it does seem like most cars did get away relatively cleanly, which is much better than the opening that we saw in the sprint. As we can see, the rest of the cars coming through now, as we have DWG at the back and hopefully wanting to move up during this endurance race. A 90-minute mammoth race ahead for everybody on this grid, so it's definitely going to begin to settle down as strategy starts to play in as we go into the night at Le Mans. But at least for the early stages, we do have action all over the field, as we can see a lot of position changes going on, as we also have Pedro now applying pressure to the Porsche ahead of him, as Jody is wanting to get that recovery drive done and moves up 2 positions in the first few corners. CEO then takes the lead as he begins to defend from both Lemony Squeeze and Mira, as well as Vipersonics in the second Porsche beginning to get involved in P4. He is hoping to get as much slipstream as possible to bring himself up to the leaders. I mean, I thought I told these guys it was a 90-minute race, but it seems like they're just going for a second sprint race here in the early stages, as everybody is battling away, completely shredding tyres throughout the field. And as we can see from the tyre, I guess, marker there at the bottom, a bunch of different strategies going on, but it does seem like most cars have started on the softs, with a few cars on the mediums as well. But definitely seems like the softs is the pick of the bunch, as we see Sal is actually the only car running the racing hards in this one, and apart from 2 others on the racing mediums, the entire grid is on softs. Now, coming towards the end of the first stint for a lot of these soft tyre runners, it's going to start turning to nigh, and again the battle still rages on. As you can see, the BRZ now catching up to CO there, who drops down to P4, meaning that the Subaru has somehow managed to pick up the pace as the tyre wear begins to kick in. So it does seem like advantage in the final sector to Subaru, as well as maybe even on tyre life as well. Maybe that car, whilst it does lack the pace in the faster sections, does actually have the capability to push its tyres a lot longer in a lot more comfortable fashion, seeming like the AMG struggling there in the early stages. But out front, Lemony Squeeze would still continue to push forward. So the first lot of pit stops were underway. We have a bunch of different cars in. We have a bunch of Ferraris, so a lot of the Ferraris really struggling in these early stages on both lap 4 and lap 5, having to get rid of the softs already. Although they do have plenty of pace, it is seeming like they are shooting up their tyres way too quick. We also have a Mercedes AMG in there as well, again seeming like they might be eating up their tyres, as well as a Porsche as well. So a bunch of battles in. I believe we have around about 3 or 4 of the Ferraris all pitting on both lap 4 and 5, so all of them having to cover off the extreme tyre wear on the rear of that Ferrari. However, leaving the pit lane, we do have a bunch of positions kind of swapping and swapping, as well. One of the hard runners here of Sal, who now moves himself up to P12. P11, JC is getting a battle underway with Mira, who was the first car to pit and sits overall in P10. However, after all of the other cars had pit, it would be Mira that takes a lead early on in this second stint. However, that extreme tyre wear on the Ferrari may prove to be his downfall. Well, as we see, Lemony Squeeze, who did manage to go the longest out of everybody on both the opening stint, and then will continue that into the rest of the race as well. As you can see, the BRZ currently sits P3, still just getting out ahead of CO, who was also pitted at this point. So very close racing with the top 4, and all 4 manufacturers once again being represented by the 4 main drivers. As we can see though, Porsche are the best of the rest, with a second car in P5, AMG sit with a car in P6, as well as another Porsche down in P7. So Porsche looking very strong here at Le Mans. That car is very comfortable for most people to drive, and it is seeming to prove that way as well in the early stages of this endurance race. Tony on a great run here, as you can see, P8 for him, P9 for Sean, dropping back after the early stages of the endurance, but definitely showing a lot of pace early on. Another Ferrari, TZR Nizam, sits in P10, and the last of the Ferraris actually sits in P11 of Stee, again having a fairly decent run in. P12 goes to Jace. He is sitting quite far back and probably not where he wants to be. He is followed by the Porsche of Jody in P13, who is followed by another one of the BRZs, and the final BRZ in P14, which is DWG DWG, who picks up a half-a-second penalty there. Pedro sits P15 and Sal, after his stint, sits in P16. Again, a completely different strategy for him. A little bit later on, we are going to have our first crash of the night, and it's going to be Braggy, who just absolutely runs off out of nowhere and gets reset. Not too sure what happened to him there, but it is looking like the Porsche of Daryl is then going to get that move done and move himself into P6. So great result for Porsche, as they have 3 cars inside the top 6, taking up half of the positions. A little bit further back, we are going to have Sean and Tommy, who are battling away for P8. Tommy putting in a great run here as he continues his recovery drive. As you can see, absolutely side by side with the Ferrari. Realistically, the top end does belong to the BRZ, but acceleration out of corners is certainly the Ferrari's strong point. Just over the halfway stage, and we are still in the dead of night as Lemony Squeeze continues his lead out in front by a fair margin at this point. A very good strategy by him, really paying off, really fuel saving, really kind of using the slipstream to his advantage. But we do have a bit of a downpour on track, as you can see, starting to get towards intermediate conditions as the next 3 cars actually very, very close to each other and all trying to slipstream and save fuel as much as possible. As we see P5 Vipersonics having a bit of a shaky moment there, as it certainly gets into full intermediate conditions, and some cars even pitting off to try and cover off any potential rain. It's unknown exactly how long the rain will hang around at this point, but it is looking like it could rain for a fair amount of the night, and it won't be able to dry up in the cooler conditions. So really looking like intermediates might be the pick of the bunch currently. However, there is a chance that it could still not rain as heavy as we really believe. As you can see, a lot of cars are getting really caught out there. In fact, DWG went for the wet compound of tyres, and they're pretty much shredded at this point. P14 is currently the AMG of Sal, and then we have Pedro in P15, as we see Jody now pitting onto the intermediate compound of tyre and taking some fuel as well. So she is going for the safe bet alongside some of the other drivers as well. However, the rain wouldn't stick around long, and we would soon see daylight. As you can see, Lemony Squeeze massively pulling out his gap at this point to around about, I believe, a minute or so. Again, taking one less pit stop than the rest of the field. However, this could cost him dear at the end, when the rest of the field will naturally have to pit no matter what. Currently in P2 was CO, and P3 is going to be Jay Mira, dropping back after his pole position start in both in the sprint race early on. P4 is myself. Now at this point, my strategy is just to follow Mira's Ferrari around and take advantage of the fuel saving I can do just by running in his slipstream. Vipersonics, again, a very lonely P5 for him at this point. Whilst he had plenty of battles early on, he was definitely the clear best of the rest. Tony currently sits in P6, however it is looking like he will have to make another pit stop for fuel, unfortunately, as we still have 20 minutes of this race to go. We then have the RSR Porsche of Animal Daryl sitting in P7, a quiet race for him once the dead of night kind of passed and the daylight shone through. P8 is Jace, again all about recovery for him, having that off early on, a very poor qualifying. It's looking like he is finally beginning to make a few strides up the field. Steve sits in a very respectable P9. P10 currently is going to be the AMG of Sal. As you can see, we again have a bunch of the Ferraris pitting in. Tyre life and fuel usage really not to their advantage here. However, they do have extremely good pace, as both of those Ferraris are going to leave the pit at the same time, meaning that the AMG continues to be overtook while sitting in the pit lane. As we see Braggy go through here after his off in the middle of the night. Not too sure what happened to his AMG there, but definitely an unfortunate event, as he had a ton of pace in the early stages. Sal would eventually leave the pit lane in P13, so very, very good result for him on his debut, as we also see one of the BRZs in the pit lane, and we will now see a retiring Porsche 911 RSR of Jody, unfortunately having to give up the ghost due to some personal issues there. So unfortunately she did have to then put the car on AI mode for the rest of the race, and that is basically her race over and done with. Mira is then going to pit in and have to cost himself an entire podium position. With one single lap to go, though, it would be tyre wear that will be the Ferrari's downfall, and that is unfortunately going to drop them off of the podium and allow a surprise podium by the BRZ. This car definitely seemed off the pace in terms of both qualifying and sprint. However, in terms of being very kind to its tyres and overall very fuel efficient, has allowed this car to kind of sit back and play the long game, and worked well for honestly the majority of the BRZs throughout this race. As you can see, 3 of them are now currently inside the top 8, which is I guess much better than expected result for Subaru. As we can see, Lemony Squeeze would definitely hold on with a great strategy, whilst he did almost blow a 1 and 5 second lead to CO. CO just couldn't give it the all at the end, unfortunately, due to fuel and tyres. So he is going to come a very good P2. P3 and the final podium position would go to myself in the Subaru team. As you can see, a great result, to be honest, and much better than I personally expected, and I think really any of the team expected as well. So Subaru getting its first podium of the season in this endurance race at Le Mans, so a great result for that team. P4 is going to be the first of the finishing Ferraris. That is going to go to Mira. Again, tyre wear and fuel use being his downfall at the end, but he is going to take the checkered flag, and he is going to take overall a very good haul of points for both Ferrari and himself to get his championship underway. Great result for him in P4. A very dramatic P5 finish by Vipersonics here. As you can see, his Porsche absolutely giving up the ghost in terms of its tyre life and almost out of fuel. He is going to have a massive spin there at the Porsche curves, and that's going to give him a P5 overall. Again, kind of a lonely race for him and not able to be challenged there at the end. P6 goes to Jace. P7, a very good result for Stee there, and a very good result for Ferrari. The third BRZ comes overall in P8, which is going to be of Tommy Hawk. A great result for him, making his way halfway up the grid after starting originally the sprint race at the back. P9, a disappointing result in the end for Sean, showing plenty of pace in the early stages. I'm sure he'll definitely come back in some of the other races throughout the season. Another disappointing result for Animal Darrell, who takes P10 after running very, very well once again in those early stages. Braggy P11, P12 goes to Nizam after that contact during the sprint with his teammate. Again, not a great weekend for him. P13 goes to DWG, a very respectable result for him. P14 on debut would go to Sal, again a great result for him, and P15 will go to Pedro. And unfortunately, after great pre-season pace as well as great pace in qualifying and the sprint, Jody will take P16 after retiring in the late stages. So it's time to view the overall standings for both the Drivers and the Teams Championship. In terms of the Drivers Championship, we have a reserve driver who currently leads the way in terms of the overall points. 48 points for Lemony Squeeze in his Porsche from this round, a great result for him on debut. CO sits in P2 in the Mercedes on 41, J Mira for Ferrari sits on 39, myself P4 on 38, Viperson or Vipersonics sits on 34, Race J sits on 28, kind of a best of the rest situation there for him. P7 on 24 points is Sean. Steve takes 24 points as well, level with his teammate. Animal Darrell, a great result for him, 21 points. Tony, a great recovery, puts him on 21 points as well. Braggy sits on 16. Tal or Nizam sits on 11. P13 goes to Pedro with 6 points. P14 is Sal, great points haul for him on debut in P6. DWG sits on 5 points, and unfortunately due to her retirement in the late stages, Jody currently sits on 16 points in the final finishing Porsche. Let's head over and have a look at the team's scores. Now, as you can see, it's very, very close. However, there is a clear leader here, and that is going to be Porsche on 106 points, Ferrari on 98 and Subaru on 92. Mercedes unfortunately only really getting carried by CO in this round, meaning that 69 points for them puts them way off the rest of the field. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of my channel members who make this kind of stuff possible. For me, this is definitely more of a passion project than it is really any kind of money maker. So a massive thank you to you guys who support the channel and allow me to create these more in-depth and longer videos. Again, I've been working on this one for a good few days now, and I've absolutely loved making it, and it is all possible due to you channel members. If you do want to join, feel free. I am always grateful for that, and a thank you to everyone who has made it to this point in the video. Join me next time on the Group 3 Saturday League as we head over to Road Atlanta. Take care, guys. Peace.